トビデオ
Okay, so let's talk about the streaming era. The media landscape has undergone a rapid evolution since those rascally tech disruptors over at Netflix set up shop and now have every media company and their mother following suit. And despite all of those streaming services having become so ubiquitous in such a short amount of time, all of them have yet to turn a true profit. Streaming services make their brand on speculation and driving subscriber growth. To drive said growth, Hollywood has invested heavily into brand new movies and TV shows, and to better minimize risk, what gets greenlit is usually a retread of old territory. They can either be sequels, reboots, and remakes, but what ultimately matters is that they get butts and couches and fingers on remotes because someone's dopamine receptors light up when they see a live-action Rescue Rangers movie chock full of self-aware meta-humor.
Keeping myself fit and, my updated modern look.
This attitude has found its way into the world of anime. The industry was also affected by the advent of streaming technology and is reacting to it similarly now that more international interests have their fingers in the pie. With companies like Crunchyroll, HIDIVE, and the aforementioned Netflix as interested parties, anime studios have been greenlighting more productions than ever, and a lot of them have also been remakes and reboots of old anime. This is not exactly a new thing per se. Remakes and redos of past anime have been around for a while now. It's only thanks to the need to sate streaming networks' demand for endless content that they now seem to be getting greenlit with more frequency. And frankly, I'm not entirely opposed to this. There are some anime out there that deserve another chance at bat. Some adaptations of famous manga might not have gotten the best treatment the first time around, either being left unfinished or having to go for the infamous anime-only ending. Which brings us to David Productions. For those of you who have been anime fans for at least a decade, you probably know them as the studio who got their big break doing, surprise surprise, the second adaptation of a popular manga franchise. And since they had such immense success with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, they decided to continue readapting popular manga into anime with this year's title, Spriggan. Based off a shonen sci-fi thriller series of the same name, Spriggan has been an overall successful ONA series since its release this June. I think. It's kinda hard to tell, what with it being trapped in Netflix prison between now and the point where it gets erased from history in the name of tax breaks. Hey, if it happened to HBO Max, it could happen to Netflix. Support physical media, people! Or other avenues. But we're not here to talk about that. We discuss old anime here, namely Spriggan's first animated rodeo.
To seal away the secrets of this lost civilization, an organization known as Arkham has been formed. Our warriors are called the Spriggan.
Eons ago, an ancient civilization possessed great and powerful technology, even more advanced than our current technology. However, that same technology also brought their civilization to ruin, and they were wiped out from the annals of history. All for except a series of messages written in ancient Hebrew informing future generations that if they discover their ancient technologies, they should be destroyed so that they shall never fall into the wrong hands.
We return our arts to the darkness where they were conceived. They must not be summoned a second time.
Fast forward to the post-Cold War era, and various national armies, PMCs, and terrorist cells have organized to become an entire crowd of wrong hands for those ancient tools to fall into. The only organization preventing this is the Arkham Corporation, who keeps these groups in check with their elite secret agents known as Spriggans.
Who the hell are you? I'm just a Spriggan. Spriggan France, Jean-Jacques Mondo.
One of these Spriggans is our protagonist, Yu Ominai. Seemingly just your average Japanese high school delinquent, Yu is Arkham's most gifted soldier, and is often sent into the field to find out-of-place artifacts before someone more nefarious does. But it looks like trouble is finding Yu first, because someone has been kidnapping and torturing his friends to death in a ploy to lure him into an obvious trap and lead him to where his next operation is, an excavation of what appears to be Noah's Ark. It's just any other mission for Yu, only this time, it's personal. 1998 Spriggan is a movie that feels suspiciously absent from the canon of anime's cinematic golden age. You know what I'm talking about. Movies like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, Perfect Blue, the kind of anime films that were animated in such a spectacular manner that they found penetration among non-anime fans in high places. Sadly, that doesn't appear to be the case. Even while the ONA is still running on Netflix at the time of this video, it seems like the original Spriggan anime film is an anime that time forgot. Even amongst hardcore weebs and animation freaks, it barely registers on their radars. This is something I find incredibly weird because it seemed like this anime had all the materials ready to become a hit in America. You had Akira's own writer and director and Katsuhiro Otomo being heavily involved in production. You had an up-and-coming animation studio with lots of positive buzz producing it. You even had the backing of the Otaku Helm distribution company ADV producing a professional-grade dub with the intent to give Spriggan that push into American theaters it needed. Why was this not a hit? Why has no one really talked about this anime up until this point? Why did it take a Netflix anime coming out for me to finally sink my teeth into this film in a cynical ploy to get algorithm points? The answers are not pretty. Spriggan the film turns out to be a classic cautionary tale of having all the right pieces and not being able to put them together into something big. This artifact may not have been too out of place in its time period, but it became an artifact nonetheless. So let's do our dig into the original film adaptation of Spriggan.
Well, Doctor, let's get started, shall we?
The word Spriggan originated in Cornish culture to describe a specific sort of mischievous spirits. Cornish mythology describes Spriggans as grotesque, malevolent fae who could conjure whirlwinds and kidnap children. But another attribute that was ascribed to them was that they were warriors in service to more powerful fae, and were often given the task to guard ancient treasures to prevent them from falling into the unworthy hands of humans. Perhaps it was this bit of cryptid trivia that led to writer Hiroshi Takashige and illustrator Ryoji Minagawa to write what would become their breakout success. By what information I could find, Spriggan had itself a fruitful and successful time in the sun. It started in Weekly Shonen Sunday in 1989 before switching over to Shonen Sunday Zolkan in 1992, where it would stay for another 4 years. Takashige semi-retired from the industry after Spriggan's run, while Minagawa's career had just gotten started. His work on Spriggan opened a lot of doors in many industries for him, being the character designer for the cult JRPG Live Alive, and would follow up Spriggan almost immediately with helming his own manga series, Project Arms. But Spriggan Mania had yet to begin because soon after the manga ended, it was announced that Toho would distribute an animated movie based off the manga's Noah's Ark arc. Covering 4 chapters is a straightforward plot about the discovery of Noah's Ark, and you and fellow French Spriggan Jean Jacquemond having to protect it from a rogue splinter group of the American military known as the United States Machine Corps, a unit of cyborg super soldiers led by the enigmatic Colonel McDougal, a child prodigy who seemingly has psychic powers thanks to a powerful electromagnet implanted into his brain and might just have his own agenda for taking control of the Ark. Overall, a good choice in plot for adapting into a movie. It has an interesting hook, shows off some of the more inspired skill set among both heroes and villains, and embodies Spriggan's themes of the geopolitical implications when powerful forgotten technology is unearthed. This was to be produced by a relatively new studio at the time, Studio 4C. I'll get into a more detailed history of Studio 4C once I cover their debut film, Memories. The long and short of it is that businesswoman and key Studio Ghibli architect Eiko Tanaka formed the studio as an alternative studio to Ghibli when it came to making anime blockbusters. In this endeavor, she brought on numerous prominent creators on board, most famously Katsuhiro Otomo. In fact, it was Otomo's involvement in the first place that got people buzzing about this movie. After all, Spriggan was conceived as a sci-fi thriller with a philosophical bent. Of course it would seem like it was in Otomo's wheelhouse. And while Hiratsugu Kawasaki, a former Ghibli animator, would be directing and storyboarding the film, it was Otomo who acted as the chief supervisor for the project. Indeed, it does feel more like an Otomo film more than anything. Spriggan did relatively well in the Japanese box office, netting 350 million yen during its debut, but there definitely was some mixed reception that did draw some side-eyeing with people complimenting the animation, and not much else. It was able to get a video game based off the film the next year, it being produced by then cult developer FromSoft and noteworthy for being a sort of primitive character action game with early design choices that would be better polished in games like Devil May Cry. A few years after the film came out, Texas-based studio ADV was able to nab the license. Company head Matt Greenfield decided that this movie was going to be ADV's first foray into theatrically released anime. On September 25th, 2001, at that year's Anime Weekend Atlanta, Greenfield announced at the ADV panel that Spriggan would go into theaters on October 12th. I'm sure you've caught on why that was a bad idea, because there was this certain tragedy that was still fresh on everyone's minds.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan.
Yeah, ADV was planning to release a film like Spriggan a month after 9/11 happened. The bodies were still being dug out of Ground Zero, and ADV decided that the best course of action was to release a film that begins with a teenager blowing themselves up, has a prominent Middle Eastern Enigma-esque score for a good chunk of it, and whose main antagonists are the United States military. In case you were wondering why the ADV brand is dead and buried now, this might be one of your answers. Now, before I really dive into this, I should let y'all know that I'm not going to spend the entire video comparing and contrasting the film with the current anime. I know there are plenty of other YouTubers exploring that very topic. That is to say that I won't not bring it up, considering how close the ONA follows the manga and the changes the film makes in adapting the source material. It is kind of unavoidable. But the main goal of this video is to examine the 1998 film itself and figuring out what works and what doesn't. Let's start off with the element that works the best, the animation. The thing that really confuses me as to why this movie hasn't even gotten a cult following is that this is some top shelf animation. It's Ghost in the Shell level animation, the type that you would expect even the most jaded otaku to be positively drooling over. This can all be credited to the talent Forcey Studio had on hand. We have Otomo acting as the film's guiding hand, helping craft the world of Spriggan with his touch of detailed sci-fi realism. And you also have Kawasaki not just as the director, but also the storyboarder, and he really gives the anime the cinematic flair it deserves in how shots are framed and action scenes are choreographed. It's pure Hollywood in the best sense of the word. But all of that really comes together through the all-star team of animators and artists that were assembled to make the movie. You have art direction by ex-Ghibli background artist Mutsuo Koseki, who gives the world of Spriggan the gritty realism it deserves. You have character designs by celebrated animator Hisashi Iguchi, who tweaks Minagawa's original designs to play up the sci-fi elements, especially the members of the Machine Corps whose cybernetic enhancements are more emphasized than they were in the manga, giving Colonel McDougal wires sticking out of his neck and the back of his skull missing to remind the audience that his godlike powers are purely the product of the American taxpayer. These design choices could also be attributed to mechanical designer Kimitoshi Yamane, a legend in the field of mecha design if there ever was one. Yamane has a knack for designing machines that look realistic without losing their cool points. With his designs, you can conceivably believe that the United States military has a 10-foot tall cyborg major who lugs around a minigun. There was even a weapons designer for this movie in Tensai Okamura, aka the guy who would go on to later direct Cowboy Bebop the movie, Wolf's Rain, and Darker Than Black. And that's not even counting the various key animators attached like Koji Morimoto, Koichi Arai, and Hidetsugo Ito, whose effects animation is above reproach. And I'd like to remind everyone watching these scenes in action, aside from some digital editing effects to achieve an otherworldly feel, most of this movie is hand-drawn. It's almost hard to believe. These guys did it the old-fashioned way and didn't have to use 3D models for the action scenes like David did. The cheaters! The animation and direction is what makes this film, or carries this film. Because it's time for the other shoe to drop and go over what doesn't work about Spriggan, which is everything else. It really did not hit me until the halfway point in watching Spriggan where I realized why this movie hasn't had any sort of legacy despite its visuals. The story it has, both as a standalone and as an adaptation, is underwhelming. As a standalone feature, it fails to maintain a compelling narrative, and as an adaptation, it sells the source material short. One nice thing I can say about the film story-wise is that it doesn't take long for it to get going. Once you establish the discovery of the Ark, which is so powerful that it causes a satellite in space to explode when activated, we're introduced to our protagonist Yu having a nightmare about losing his platoon out in the jungle before going to that aforementioned scene where one of his friends is being forced to blow himself up, which then leads to the main mission. Said main mission starts off with a near midnight cowboy situation, Yu's contact in the field betraying him, and a lengthy car chase scene that turns into a chase on foot, that turns into a sword fight, that ends with Yu making a snappy comment to the camera that's observing him miles away before destroying it.
You idiots sure as hell aren't ready to take on a Spriggan.
All of that in the first 15 minutes. And even then, it still continues with some amazing animated action scenes afterwards. If it's not an action sequence, it's usually set up for more action sequences, up until the 30-minute mark of the 90-minute film. While it's not a crime in having your sci-fi action movie be front-loaded with action in the first act, you do gamble with blowing your load too soon, and that's what happens with Spriggan. Because once Yu kills the minigun-toting Major and Colonel McDougal enters the fray, the bill has come due. Now the movie ends up having to drag its feet for the second act, with the scientists having to slowly escort McDougal to the Ark where he can give a lengthy villain monologue while Yu and Jean argue whether or not Yu is too soft to be a Spriggan, while also getting Yu's backstory in the midst of all this.
Can't you see that there are some things that aren't worth the price men must pay to achieve them?
Please spare me the sentimentality and appeal to my emotions. It wasn't man who sent me on this course, Doctor.
And now's as good a time as any to talk about the changes Otomo and company made in adapting the manga to screen. Now, a bad adaptation does not necessarily equal a bad movie. Even if a movie is so different from its source material that it's pretty much its own thing can still be a good standalone film. Case in point, that other movie Otomo did a decade before Spriggan. Akira is noteworthy in that it's a terrible adaptation of its material. Its writing is mostly the product of it being a lengthy 6-volume epic compressed into a feature-length movie. Multiple plot-important events are excised completely, main characters are underwritten or written out altogether, and a lot of moments feel like the anime is just barely scratching the surface thematically. Yet the film is still to this day held in high regard, and not just because of the famous motorcycle slide. Akira, the film, is still a compelling cyberpunk narrative about being caught up in a conflict that's much bigger than you and trying to take back control by any means necessary, with Kaneda and Tetsuo occupying the two ends of the spectrum in how one does take control back. It also doesn't hurt that Otomo was the author of the original source material, so he knew how to reforge it from scratch. Not so with Spriggan. Otomo is now stuck with the opposite problem. Not only does he have to adapt someone else's manga, but he has to expand 4 chapters of material into a film rather than compress 6 volumes into a film. On paper, this sounds like the easier task, but when you see how the Netflix series easily told the same story in literally half the time, you can see how the movie feels a little unnecessarily bloated. This is where the aforementioned pacing problem comes into play. The reason why the middle part of the film suffers such a slowdown is because they are killing time. And they really did not need to do this because they could have filled this airspace with so much more meaningful writing, and they just didn't. There shouldn't be a reason why Yu, our protagonist, disappears for a large chunk of the second act.
No way, you're bluffing! You would never risk killing your friend!
I don't bluff, mon ami.
And this could have been an opportunity to really expand on the political commentary that's present in the original source material. There's so much that can be said about American imperialism in this story arc, a thing that's made super blunt when you have 2 enemy combatants whose code names are Fat Man and Little Boy in a Japanese production. It does seem like they are expanding on that with making it more explicit that the United States military only sees McDougal as just another weapon to use for their goal, and they have the belief that they have totally pacified him by feeding him a steady diet of good old-fashioned propaganda. But it doesn't go beyond any of that, and once McDougal kills his handler and cuts contact with the Pentagon, the whole American imperialism thing gets dropped from that point. Also, in the interest of stretching out this movie, it ends up having to delete some interesting parts that were in the manga. Not only does this arc introduce us to the character of Jean-Jacques Mons, but also his hidden ability that makes him an elite Spriggan in the first place. his lycanthropy.
あいつはてめえの血を見ると獣人に変わっちまうんだ。そうなったらもう収まらねえ。動くもの全部ぶち殺すまでな。
Him turning into a werewolf and turning Little Boy and his platoon into red chunks is a highlight of this arc. But because more time is needed, that whole sequence is done away with because it happens too quickly, and Jean ends up killing Little Boy after an extended truck chase in a blizzard. Which is cool enough, I will admit, but it subtracts from the craziness that Spriggan is built on. The expansion even causes the film to lose focus on what should be a straightforward plotline. Near the climax, Noah's Ark is revealed to be this combination cryogenics lab / weather control machine, and the reason why the Americans wanted it in the first place was so that their country could have sole ownership of controlling global weather, thereby making them the most powerful country in the world.
My country thinks it has to lead the world in all things. They'd do anything to get their hands on this. That's why the Machine Corps sent me here. With this kind of power at their command, they'd have every government in the world at their feet.
But McDougal, believing he is God, decides that he should be the only one to control the Ark and use it to pull some JRPG villain shit to teach humanity a lesson for destroying the environment and causing climate change.
Don't make me laugh, McDougal.
The entire human race is a mistake of history, Doctor. We have the chance to correct God's only creative failure. Can't you see that he's giving us the chance to correct all that's wrong in the world? That's why I brought you here. That's why he brought you here. Please, work with me.
But in the film, he goes on for so long explaining this motivation that it kinda ends up breaking down and changes at least 3 times during his big villain speech. In the source material, he's pretty focused on the reason why he has to destroy civilization and feels that it's the only way for humanity to learn their lesson and not make the same mistakes for when they rebuild the world from its ashes.
僕はノアのために作られたんだ。ノアがなければ
But in the movie, that motivation gets twisted and soon becomes, you know what, I'll just destroy the world for shits and giggles because I'm the god! I'm the god!
I am God, Spriggan, and I will destroy the human race! I will cleanse this planet and make them pay! But before I do that, you will die!
But the worst call in expanding the adaptation comes in the form of tying the main plot to Yu's overall backstory. This is a creative decision that sounds good in theory, but actually makes the story much weaker in execution. Yu's backstory, which is explained in another arc, is that his parents were archaeologists killed by unknown assailants in Iran and was subsequently kidnapped by the United States military in order to be brainwashed into their child soldier Black Ops program, Cosmos. However, an operation involving him massacring a group of other archaeologists caused him to break his conditioning, thus killing his entire unit and commanding officers in retaliation. So if there was a plot to weld this backstory to, it has to be this one where the United States military are also the main antagonists. But here's where things get a little squirrely. The film seems like it's way more focused on Yu's backstory at the expense of Yu himself. Yu is supposed to be this smart aleck little shithead, sort of this Japanese delinquent James Bond, and to be fair, he is that in some of the scenes.
Please sit back and enjoy the rest of your flight.
Well, that's certainly hospitable, and I was starting to feel unwanted here.
But the whole subplot of a specter of his past coming back to haunt him kind of swallows his character, and for most of the movie, he's either on a personal revenge quest or just being the subject of long-winded exposition scenes.
You saw the image of your parents and the people you killed, didn't you? Is that what finally drove you mad, number 43?
What's worse is that the addition of his backstory into the adaptation ends up weakening character moments that were already present in the source material. In the manga, Yu and Jean end up locking horns with each other because they disagree over how they handle enemy combatants. After beating the Machine Corps soldiers, Yu wants to bring the wounded Major Fat Man in for questioning, but Jean just wastes the dude right then and there, saying that Yu is too soft to be a true Spriggan. This is the character conflict that persists all throughout the arc until they make up through Jean rescuing Yu from the arc's collapse at the end. In the movie, however, Major Fat Man is rewritten to be Yu's old commanding officer coming back from the dead, and on top of that, the guy who tortured and killed Yu's friends to lure him out to Turkey in the first place.
If I'd known you were going to die so easily, I'd have taken more time torturing your friends. Do you remember the message I wrote on your friend Tanaka?
And once Yu knows all of that, he no longer wants to bring him in for questioning, and instead guts him like a fish and is about to turn his corpse into hamburger with a mounted machine gun he just ripped off a Jeep before Jean steps in and tells him to chill out.
Enough is enough.
But we still get Jean telling Yu that he's too much of a softie after all of that, and the anime continues as if Yu didn't just completely lose it in the heat of battle. I mean, hello? Did no one check to see if this plotline wasn't just jammed haphazardly in here as a way that contradicts the main story? Were you just too busy taking another stab at the Steam Boy script, Otomo? Just so many problems piled on top of each other that even when the climax ends with McDougal self-destructing the Ark in a classic taking my ball and going home move, and Jean helping Yu out of a collapsing Ark while being chased by a decaying T-Rex, I feel nothing. In the end, Spriggan from 1998 is a gilded feature. Extravagantly awesome animation that is masking a story that does not hold up to even the slightest bit of scrutiny, and some truly awful pacing brought on by a need to pad this baby out to 90 minutes. If I could compare it to any other film, it would not be Akira, but rather Venus Wars. Another anime with top-tier animators creating top-tier hand-drawn animation, but failing to craft a story that could equally match it.
Let's chill out!
So it really doesn't take a genius to figure out why Spriggan never stuck around in the minds of otaku, and what little legacy it did have is being swallowed up by a more faithful adaptation on Netflix. All in spite of the original film being way more impressive on a technical scale, which is the only reason I can recommend you watch this movie. Animation this good really cannot afford to go to waste. It's a shame it had to be this way, Spriggan, but you really should have gotten it right the first time.